بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم الحمد لله رب العالمين حمد يوفي ويكافئ مزيدا يا ربنا لك الحمد ينبغي لجلالك ووجهك العظيم وسلطانك نويت تعلم التعليم وتذكر التذكير والنفع وانتفاع الفاتحة الاستفادة الحث ولا كمسك بكتاب الله تعالى وسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم ودعاء الهدى وتلادة الخير واتباع وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. All praise be to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our creator, our sustainer, the one who is completely independent of any need of his creation. His entire creation is dependent upon him, the one who is sent as a greatest gift and source of blessing, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, peace and blessings be upon him, upon the prophets and messengers from amongst his brethren, upon his noble family, noble companions, and upon all those that follow his righteous footsteps with excellence until the day of resurrection. Ameen, ameen, ameen. We remind ourselves and remind others to, to remind ourselves and to remind others, to benefit ourselves and to benefit others, in order to hold fast to the Book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and in doing so calling people to guidance and guiding people to do good in order to gain the noble countenance and pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Alhamdulillah, we in this session we'll be covering Aqeedah, and I'm just sharing my screen, which I hope you can all see. Okay, this is based upon a course which I had put together on the essentials of Islam. So we move on to the section of creed. Usually we would start with creed, with Iman, Aqeedah, and then we would move on to Islam, which is the outward practice, and then cover the third element of Ihsan, which is spiritual excellence. And this is all based upon the Hadith Jibreel, which we've been talking about and mentioning in the fiqh class that we've had. So just to begin here, Aqeedah, if we can start with the definition. So literally, Aqeedah is to tie a knot, from Aqeedah, and to prevent something slipping. So to tie a knot and prevent it from slipping. And technically, according to the science, is to bind oneself to believe in Allah through strong evidence. Okay, this is the meaning of Aqeedah. And we might know, for example, the word Aqd al-Nikah. This Aqd al-Nikah is making this bond, tying the knot, and making this bond of a marriage contract. So this Aqeedah is tying this knot in our belief, so to speak. And Tawheed, the second word I want us to look at is to confirm the oneness and uniqueness of Allah in essence, attribute, and action. This is Tawheed, to believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's oneness and uniqueness in his essence, attributes, and actions. Okay. So the first is being. So this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's self-attributes. He has to, exist. He is a being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That which renders the essence inconceivable in its absence. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has this self-attribute of existence. He needs to exist. Okay? Without existence, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's being is inconceivable from the intellect. We can't conceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala if we don't, without understanding that he exists. So this is the first, is his being. The second we want to cover is Sifat al-Salbiya, which is the negative attributes. And what are they? They are pre-eternality, endlessness, oneness, self-subsistence, absolute dissimilarity to created things. And why are they called negative attributes? They're called negative attributes because we negate we negate these for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, meaning that if we say that, if we don't negate, for example, pre-eternality, then we're saying that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he doesn't, he has an end, but we're saying he doesn't have an end. So we're negating his pre-eternality. We're negating that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has an end. Okay? We're negating Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has multiplicity. Okay? So each of these things, this is why they're called negative attributes. It's not to say that it's negative for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in any way, because we don't ascribe negativity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but the attributes in and of themselves show that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is perfection. And this is why they call this sifat al-talbiyah. So moving on and covering firstly pre-eternality, it is logically necessary that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala be pre-eternal without beginning. Okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala existed and has always existed. There's no beginning to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence. Whereas creation, we have come into existence, which means what? We didn't exist before, and he brought us into existence. Okay? Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, if we say that he had a beginning, that means that he came into existence, but he always existed. Okay? Allah existed before concept of time and space came into existence. Why? Because time and space are both created. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists, we say he's transcendent beyond time and transcendent beyond space. He doesn't occupy a space. If we say he occupies a space, we're moving into other parts of Aqeedah, but if we say he occupies a space, then he doesn't occupy another space, and that confines him to a space. If we say that he's confined to time, that's something that he's created. So he doesn't have any control of anything outside of time. No, he exists before these concepts, meaning he's created these concepts. And this correct understanding prevents fallacy of infinite regress. Okay? And we have to put our learning about Aqeedah beyond our intellect, in the sense that this is the base, and then our intellect and thought process is around this. We can't say, oh, it doesn't make sense, because this is the pinnacle, is the Aqeedah, and our intellect submits to that, and then therefore this is how we understand. But rationally we can perceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Going on to his endlessness, it is illogical to conceive of an end of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's existence. Because what we've just done is we've negated that he has a beginning. Therefore, we must also negate he has an end. Everything that's been created has a beginning and has an end. Okay? Everything has a beginning and has an end. So it's illogical to conceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have a beginning, but then saying that he has an end. No. He's beyond his endlessness. So he has no end. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be attributed a place in time. Well, he created place, he created time. Consideration of time and place only apply to created beings, i.e., those of us as human beings, of everything in nature that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, everything in the entire universe, in the cosmos of his creation, time and place apply to them. We are living in this time. We have in this time of Ramadan, and we're occupying a place in our home. We're existing in time and we're existing in place. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is beyond this. Oneness. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. He has no partners. He is, he is ahad. He is one. And this is a fundamental belief that we all have as believers, as Muslims, that there's no one that is joined to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with him in any way whatsoever. Okay, this negates, for example, other faiths and other religions which say that Allah has a son, na'udhu billah, or there's different gods, and Allah and God is divided into different, the god of rain, the god of this, the god of that. The Greek mythology, for example, so Allah's one. Allah is one. He is ahad, the logical one. Okay, the necessary one. Logically, we perceive him as to be one, and it's necessary that he is one. Because then we start going into issues if we don't accept his oneness. For example, if there's multiple gods, then what about when they disagree with one another? Who has power? So this is absurd. SubhanAllah, when Sayyidina Bilal al-Habshi, the great companion of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and the muaddin of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was he was in Makkah, and he was a slave, and the people of Makkah, they didn't accept Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They didn't accept revelation. This is why with a lot of the surahs of Makkah, we see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is talking to people that don't have belief. So it's about, the belief in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and tawheed at its centrality. One of the occasions where Sayyidina Bilal, his owner, I believe Umayy ibn Khalaf, was said to him, denounce your belief in Allah, in this God, one God that you say. Denounce your belief in Islam. And he was taken into the heat of the day. And if many of us, if we've ever experienced being out in Makkah in the middle of the day at the time of Dhuhr, and if we've ever been doing tawaf at the Kaaba, right near the Kaaba itself, and we feel the heat of that, multiplication of this in being in a complete open plain. And Sayyidina Bilal was brought out into the heat in the middle of the day, and he was told to denounce his faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he kept on saying, whip him and placing rocks upon him, to endure pain upon him. And he kept on. He said, do you denounce? Who do you believe in? Do you denounce? He says, ahad, 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 in the one, meaning I believe in Allah. I don't believe in these gods that you worship in the Kaaba. I believe in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he carried on being tortured, and he kept on saying, ahad, ahad. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq, he purchased Sayyidina Bilal's freedom, and he paid the money to Sayyidina Bilal's owner, and he let Sayyidina Bilal was let free. And Sayyidina Abu Bakr Siddiq asked him the question later on, sometime later, and he asked him, he said, Ya Bilal, when you were being tortured in this manner, in the middle of the day, in this heat, and you had these rocks placed upon you, and you were experiencing pain, what was going through your mind? What was your state of being when this was happening to you? He said that my blood was mixed with the halawat al-iman, with the sweetness of iman. Meaning this was a state that he had. He was in a state of ecstasy, in the sense of, his conviction and his belief. And this is, we're not comparing ourselves to the likes of Sayyidina Bilal in any way, because these are the best of people. But the experience and the learning of Aqeedah should bring us to being closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through his recognition, through recognizing him and recognizing his oneness, that he is one. Okay, so this is his oneness. Self-subsistence. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a self-subsistent being, meaning he doesn't require anyone to do anything for him. Okay, this is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being self-subsistent. Okay, he's a samad. He's not in need of anything. Okay, he's not in need of his creation. And if he was in need of his creation, then this means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is reliant upon people. God is reliant upon his creation. Whereas we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is independent of any need of his creation, and his entire creation are dependent upon him. He doesn't need our worship. When we're worshipping for his sake, for him, but it's actually ourselves that are benefit from this worship. But does that increase Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala one iota? No, it doesn't. Because he's complete and he's perfect. Whereas we are incomplete and we're deficient. And we are in need of him. We're completely in need of him. If it wasn't for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala providing us subsistence for us, we would die. If we didn't have oxygen in the air to breathe, we would cease to exist. We need oxygen. We need food. We need water. We need to relieve our bodies from the toxic things inside. This is part of our makeup. We're completely in need. But for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's absolutely without any need at all. So we say he's logical independence. He's completely independent. His dissimilarity from created things. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not similar to his creation in any way whatsoever. Okay? He's not similar to his creation in any way whatsoever. So his absolute transcendence, whatever your mind can conceive of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is other than that. In reality, we can't conceive Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We can't, because we're created beings and we have limits, and Allah has no limits. So he can't be perceived by the human being. But what we know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, what we can say is that we know him of what he's not. So he's not anything that we know, because this is a resemblance of his creation. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, laysa kamithlihi shay, as Allah says. There's nothing the like unto him. If we see something, Allah's not that thing. And this is actually important to mention, because some people, they have, maybe a very incorrect view that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is in the sky and he has a beard and he's looking down upon his creation. This is completely incorrect, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have a form. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is completely dissimilar to any of his creation. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have eyes, and we have eyes so we can see. Without our eyes, we can't see. Okay, Allah doesn't have eyes, because the eyes are something that the human being has. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have the attributes of human beings. Okay, completely negating that which other faith traditions have wrongfully attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can be in the form of a human. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can take a human form, and we say Allah's transcendent beyond that, because that is a complete incorrect statement, and completely unbefitting, and to mention this of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So his essence, his dhat, and his attributes, his sifat, and his actions, his af'al, are unlike any others. Okay? When we talk of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's attributes, his attributes, okay, his attributes are not like attributes of human beings. Human beings can be merciful. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Ar-Rahman and is Ar-Rahim. He's merciful. And human beings can be Rahim. They can be merciful. But the mercy of the human being is in no comparison to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And this is something that, if we look at, we'll move on and we talk about prophets in future session. But one of the scholars, he put this in a beautiful way. He said that the prophets, such as the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam,
Assalamu alaikum.
Looking at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, his attributes would be like you looking at the lake in a dark night and the reflection of the moon upon that lake. Looking at the water and looking at that reflection is like the mercy, for example, of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But the moon, you can say, for example, is like Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's the moon is completely different. What we're seeing is a reflection. So we can see human beings, the like of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, a reflection of the divine attributes, but not the divine attributes. Okay? Because creator is dissimilar from his creation. We don't say that the prophets or any of creation have any similarity to the creator. But what we can see is the more that a human being is connected to the divine, the more reflection of the divine attributes that human being will embody, which is different from the actual attributes that the creator has. Okay? So his affirmative attributes. So what do we need? So we've talked about the negatory, and now we move on to that which we affirm for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What are they? The first is life. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is Hayy. We say in the Ayatul Kursi, Al-Hayy al-Qayyum. Okay? Ayatul Kursi is one of the greatest parts of the Quran to understand the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The greatest verse of the Quran, the Ayatul Kursi. And in terms of understanding Tawheed, Surah Al-Ikhlas. Okay, and this was a question by one of the women at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that describe your Rabb, describe your Lord. And Surah Ikhlas was given by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Surah of purity, the Surah which describes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in his oneness, in his essence. So life, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we affirm that he is living. Okay? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not someone existed. Allah is alive now. Okay? His life is different from our life. Our life has an beginning and has an end. You know, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is always living. He has life. Second, I'm just thinking, yeah, we're going through this. Knowledge, will, power, hearing, sight, and speech. They are affirmed for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the absolute sense, meaning with complete perfection and ruling out any imperfection. It's possible to grasp the concept, but deficient in understanding because our understanding is limited. We can only grasp to a certain extent. You know. So first is knowledge. So this is the first of the affirmative attributes is ilm, is knowledge of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah has knowledge of all things. Okay? That which uncovers the reality of necessary, possible, and impossible things as truly are. Okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows the reality of everything. Okay? He knows what's going on inside of us. He knows the thoughts that are coming into our minds. He knows the situations that we're experiencing. He knows that for every single individual. He knows what thoughts have come into our mind and what we've acted upon. He knows what thoughts have come into our mind and that we've discarded. He knows what is happening inside. That's in terms of the human being, one person. He has this for his entire creation. Okay? He has knowledge of everything that's possible and everything that's impossible. He has knowledge of everything in existence and that which is outside of existence, that which he's created, that which he could have created, that which he didn't create, that, you know, he has knowledge of all of these things because he is all-knowing. He's Alim. Our knowledge is limited. It's contingent upon what we've interacted with, what we've heard, what we've read. This is all our knowledge. And it's not like true reality in a sense, whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's knowledge is true reality. He is the one who created knowledge. His knowledge is not acquired or time-bound. Okay? We acquire knowledge. We acquire knowledge through these sessions. We acquire knowledge through books. We acquire knowledge through different means. Through experiences, we acquire knowledge. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was always knowing. And he is knowing. And he will always be knowing. Because he's Alim. He's all-knowing. Our knowledge is time-bound. Today we know something. Maybe a few years' time we may forget. Yesterday we didn't know this. Today we know it. Knowledge is time-bound. Maybe when we reach an older age, we become more forgetful. So a human being has phases. And knowledge is bound through these phases and this time and through this acquisition. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he has complete knowledge. Okay, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will. Allah is pre-eternally attributed with will. Okay? He has will pre-eternally. His will specifies that which will be from that which could be. Okay? So what he decides to execute, his will. Yeah, his irada, which is different from that which could happen, but it didn't happen. Allah didn't will that. Okay? This is his decree. And we accept this from our belief that everything comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He willed it to happen, that's why it happened. Nothing occurs except by his will. And it's something that we find ourselves in today, the situation of being in lockdown. It's not because of somebody just deciding that. It's the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala meant that we're in this lockdown. The will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is that we're in the situations that we're in. It's not because of other people. Other people are a means of execution of this world and so forth. But ultimately, it's all from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that the believer is always in the best state. Okay, we're always in the best state, meaning whatever we experience, it's the best for us. But we can't perceive that, because even in the bad that we may experience, there's goodness for us. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is giving us, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is everything happens through His will. Nothing can happen without His will. And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said, if the whole world was to gather together and harm one individual, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would not will that individual will not be harmed. You can have the greatest of artillery, the greatest of army, the greatest of government, everything to kill an individual. But if Allah didn't will that, it wouldn't happen, because Allah didn't will it, despite what creation outwardly has to execute that. Whereas on the opposite side, the Prophet ﷺ gave an example of the fact that if everyone willed to save an individual, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intended harm to reach him, then that harm would reach him. Okay? And we can see when we have a room full of doctors, and all these doctors with their medical experience and knowledge and understanding of medicine are trying to help this one individual survive. They don't have the will to do that, because ultimately they accept the will is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's beyond them. Will is not with people. Will is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is from our iman, and inshallah by just connecting ourselves to this should bring us close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and really understanding that actually there's no need for despair in a sense, because he has will. Everything happens by His will. Okay, so power. Okay, He has power. It's qudra. The bringing into existing and removing from existence the bringing into existence and removing from existence what Allah has willed in accordance with His knowledge. Okay? Through Allah's will and through His knowledge, He then exercises His power. Okay? His will is the fact that that was going to happen. His power is that execution of how that is happening. Okay? His power is not contingent on the existence of things. Okay? Because then we would say that He's not all powerful. He needs things to help Him in His power. Okay? But He's not. He has complete power. He has complete. This is why we say, وَلَا حَوْلَ وَلَا قُوَّةَ إِلَّا بِاللَّهِ. We have no power except through Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Okay? And life. La ilaha illahu al-hayy al-qayyum. There is no God but Him, but He. Al-hayy, the living, al-qayyum, the self-subsistent. Okay? From the Ayat al-Kursi in Surah al-Baqarah. Life is a conditional attribute without which it is impossible for a being to be categorized with affirmative attributes. So life is conditional. We need life, then we can confirm the other attributes. Otherwise, how can we confirm the other attributes without life? And His life is not like our life. And we've talked about that because our life is contingent. we have a beginning point to our life, we have an end point to our life. We have a place in our life. We're living on the earth. We need oxygen in that to breathe. That's all contingent things for our living. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's life is not contingent in any way. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is as-Sami'. Yeah? He is Sami'un Alim. He's hearing and he's seeing. Okay? He is as-Sami'un. He is the hearing. And Allah is eternally attributed with audition. He hears everything. Okay? He hears every existent sound, even the sound of light traveling through space. Okay? Allah hears everything. If He didn't hear everything, He's not Sami'. He's not hearing. Our hearing is contingent upon us having ears. And when we have ears, there's no guarantee that we're going to hear. It's the sound waves that travel. We're contingent upon the distance, the frequency, the ear itself, the eardrum, the oscillations that are going inside. All of these are contingent for human beings. Whereas Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He hears without the need of anything, but He just hears. How He hears, Allah knows. But we don't go into this. We say He's hearing. That's what we need to understand, is that He's hearing. And His hearing is dissimilar to our hearing. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is al-Basir. He has complete sight. Allah is eternally attributed with sight. He's always seeing. He is seeing now. He's seeing us. And He will always see. He sees every existent thing, even the smallest particles and waves. Our sight is contingent upon the eye and the rays and the light rays that are coming into our eyes, so we can actually generate this picture. In the dark, we can't see. We need light to see. Okay? And even when we have light to see, there's certain things we can't see. There's certain things that we can see under a microscope. And then even under a microscope, there's certain things we can't see. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, through His al-Basir, He can see everything without the need of any instrument. So His sight is totally unlike our sight. Okay? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He sees the smallest of black ants in the darkest night of sitting on a rock in the desert. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the sight of that. Meaning Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has sight of His entire creation. Okay? His speech. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the attribute of speech. He is the one who speaks. He is eternally attributed with divine speech. And this is how Allah spoke to Musa with true speech. Kallam Allahu Musa takliman. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala spoke to Musa with this speech, this kalam. Because He has speech. Now, what does speech entail for us? Speech entails having a mouth and having a tongue and having the ability to articulate through this mouth and through this tongue. Because these are modes of our speaking. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's speech is not like that of our speech. He speaks, but He doesn't speak like our speech. Okay? His speech does not resemble our speech in any form. Okay? So that just brings us to the end of this session. Does anybody have any questions as to what's been covered so far?
Assalamualaikum, brother. Yes, I have one. You mentioned a hadith that Prophet Muhammad SAW said that whatever experience we have, that is the best. Can you please explain that? How is that best?
So the Prophet ﷺ said that the state of believer is the best, meaning that he has whatever they're going through, so whatever we're experiencing in what the will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has put upon us, that's the best for us in our relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And to explain this further is that sometimes something might happen to us, and such a thing, outwardly it seems bad, but what that thing does to us, it's a test for us, and through this test we turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we have patience with him, and we start to become closer to him. Whereas somebody might have a different situation, they're at a time of happiness, and they are brought close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala through recognizing his blessings and turning to him and thanking him for the blessings that he's shown us. And another narration of the Prophet, he said that every affair of the believer is good, and a believer is in one of two states. He's either in the state of sabr or in the state of shukr. The state of sabr, which is patient, which is actually when we're afflicted with something, we're patient with that. And we turn back to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the times of difficulty. And in the times of ease, we have gratitude and we thank him for what we have. So this is the explanation of that. Does that answer your question?
Yes, Jazakallah.
Any other questions?
I have a question, please. Is it shirk to try and imagine when you're trying to get close? Like, for example, I was told that it's shirk to try and sort of feel that you're close to the Arsh, or to do anything like that.
Firstly, what is shirk? Shirk is to associate partners with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And no associating the partners to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If you think about, we are people that need means in order for our focus. For example, when we go to the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the Ka'bah al-Musharrafah, Allah's not residing inside the Kaaba. Allah is beyond place. So why the Kaaba and why focusing on the Kaaba is because these are from the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And it gives us that conceptual connection. But we're not conceptualizing the form of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's focusing us. So if we're focusing on such things that bring us to a greater presence to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that's what we should be doing. So, if we can't see the Arsh. We know the Arsh exists because we're told the Arsh exists. But to think about the Arsh, there's nothing wrong to think about the Arsh. Conceptualizing his creation, which is fine, which is different from conceptualizing him who is beyond conception. Does that answer your question?
I think so. Yes.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I had another one. Okay, sorry, go ahead.
How do you explain to children how does Allah look like?
Well, Aqeedah becomes quite difficult for children because they won't have the same ability to rationalize, and you wouldn't actually say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala looks like anything, but rather talk about his attributes and of his mercy and his love, and allowing the children to kind of feel that, as opposed to talking about conceptual concepts. So I would completely steer away from that. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he's created everyone with a fitrah to know him. So every child is born upon this kind of primordial disposition to recognize a creator. But how do they recognize creation? Not by describing physically and looking like, but actually, how is Allah in his attributes? We know him through what we experience from him. So we experience his love, we experience his mercy, we experience at the same time his justice, we experience his power, we experience all of these things. So from a child's perspective, to connect them to that. And there's a very good book actually that I came across on the 99 names of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for children. Maybe this can be shared on this group, inshallah, if I find the author's name. And this is really nice because it breaks down each of the attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for children, giving them kind of relative examples of understanding those attributes.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So I just have another question quickly. I was just reading something just now, coincidentally, about Adam alayhi salam, and there's a hadith about Adam alayhi salam was made in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's image, and I think it's and there may be another hadith that I've read, that I've heard of somewhere, that he is the closest in resemblance to Allah Ta'ala out of all of human beings.
Well, I do recall of this narration, and I would need to look into it further. But one thing I can mention is that, again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala doesn't have any resemblance of form. So this may be taking it from a different meaning, not the physical form. So physical form, there's no resemblance between the created beings and the creator. But if you give me some time, I'll look into that, and then inshallah we'll discuss it at the beginning of the next class.
So that'll be next Sunday then?
Next Sunday, inshallah, yeah.
Okay, Jazakallah khair.
Well, yeah. If there's nothing, inshallah, we'll end here. Ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us an understanding of His religion, He gives us an understanding of Himself, and that we increase our connection to Him and strengthen our bond to Him in our iman, in our yaqeen, through learning this science of Aqeedah. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us benefit to us and our family members, that He allows us to always be in His disobedience and keep away from disobedience in all forms. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allows us to embody the concept of restraint in these days and these nights of Ramadan, that He accepts our fasts, and He allows us to grow in taqwa, and that we become better human beings and become people that are closer to our Creator. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He allows us to follow and embody the way of the messengers, and that we travel on their footsteps, and that we reach guidance through this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala save us from any confusion and anxiety and spiritual, physical and mental ailments, and that He keeps us all well, and he blesses our families and us and all the people that are connected to us. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He accepts us all. Sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He removes difficulties from this ummah, from the east to the west, that those people that are in difficulty, that are in suffering, that are in need, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala fulfills their need, and that we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for that which the Prophet ﷺ asked for. We ask to be safe from that which he asked to be safe from. Subhana rabbika rabbil izzati amma yasifun, salamun al mursalin, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. Nashhadu an la ilaha illallah, nastaghfirullah, nas'aluka al jannata wa na'udhu bika minan nar. Nashhadu an la ilaha illallah, nastaghfirullah, nas'aluka al jannata wa na'udhu bika minan nar. Nashhadu an la ilaha illallah, nastaghfirullah, nas'aluka al jannata wa na'udhu bika minan nar. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا. اللهم إنك عفو تحب العفو فاعف عنا وعن والدينا يا كريم.